For Tuesday, the 23rd of May, I'm Randy Kure via Twitter Spaces coming at you live. This is What's Up the Sports podcast. Hope you are doing well. And for those of you who are north of the 49th parallel, hope you had a great long weekend. A few things to get to this evening. The Arizona Coyotes plan to move to the Phoenix suburb of Tempe has been rejected by City Council, all but assuring their demise in Arizona. What will happen with the Toronto Maple Leafs for the upcoming season? The Leafs are looking for a new GM. The Raptors are looking for a new head coach. How will their respective rosters look for the 23-24 campaign? And of course, more controversy involving star guard Ja Morant of the Memphis Grizzlies. Joining us for the roundtable, he's had a very busy past couple of days. For Tony Antoniou, I'm always extremely grateful that he was able to join me tonight. Tony, thank you so much. How are you?
Oh, I'm good, man. I'm good. My pleasure. Happy times in the family here, so I'm glad to join you. No problem.
No, that's
great. I apologize if I'm moving around and stuff, and I ended up at my parents' house. That wasn't the plan, but good things are going on with the family. So
no, and that's definitely the most important thing. Absolutely. And he gave such a great performance a couple of weeks ago, his debut performance on What's Up the Sports podcast, and he agreed to join us once again. Neel Katarey is back. Neel, how's it going? And did life change for you since you made that debut performance, and now you're plastered all over the social media world?
Well, I tell you, some should only pray to be so lucky as I was that one that day. The doors it's opened, the opportunities that have come about. I mean, Randy, they can't build enough statues. No, okay, let's.
No, absolutely.
You've perfected the autograph, Neel. Have you perfected the autograph?
A couple thousand more attempts and I should get it.
Yeah. Well, you be sure to remember where it all started from. Okay, so
never forget where I came from.
Well, guys, before we get to it, obviously the NHL playoffs are at its quarter of conference finals, and the four remaining teams are teams located in the southern United States. And for Commissioner Gary Bettman, this has to be his dream come true. Of course, he was a commissioner when the Southern invasion began. You think of Tampa, you think of Anaheim, you think of Dallas when they moved from Minnesota, as well as Arizona Coyotes themselves. Sorry, did I say Dallas came from Arizona or Minnesota? But you definitely get my point. The one thing that I was kind of wondering before we get started here, fellas, is that with this new invasion of success in the southern United States, I mean, do you think this is going to move the needle at all? Of course, the four remaining teams are Dallas, Vegas, Carolina, and Florida. Their team, of course, in close to Miami. We've all appreciated hockey for as long as we can remember, but do you think this is sustainable for the southern United States to get into hockey?
Well, as winning sets the tone for all of it. I think the NHL knows, and I think Gary Bettman's smart enough to know that the idea, you want to try and grow the game, but we've watched it for the last how many years, all my life, the continuation of trying to grow the game in the United States and bring it to a level of, even Major League Baseball, and it doesn't work. I think the most important thing that the NHL needs to do is grow their franchises within their markets in the surrounding area, because it's a niche sport. It's always going to be a niche sport down there. Unfortunately, I don't think it'll pick up anytime soon. And so, yeah, I think the success of these organizations, of these Southern franchises, are good for those markets. But will it move the needle on a national scale? I don't think so.
Tony, to that point though, and I think it's safe to say the most successful team in the southern part of the United States is the Tampa Bay Lightning, and they seem to have a real following within uh, Central Florida, and you have to now, yeah, sure, they've won three cups since they began play, 31 years ago. Is that basically the reason why hockey has, and especially Tampa, the Tampa community has taken to this team because of three Stanley Cup wins? I mean, we remember Carolina drawing crickets before they really overhauled their marketing strategy. Vegas does seem to be picking. Vegas seems to be a winner since they started in the 2017 season. Dallas seems to be doing okay as well. Do you still think that it would be a niche sport if those teams had the success of Tampa?
Yeah, I think even Tampa is they're good within that area. They just don't. I'm talking about on a national scale. On it was ESPN put out, or they put out ESPN's numbers for playoff coverage, and the whole first round drew as much as two NBA playoff games did, the entire first round combined. So my point is that the NHL is never going to move the needle on a national scale in terms of national coverage of hockey teams, but success makes a huge difference, and it helps your team within that market. And I think that's where they need to focus. As I said before, I don't know how much more the NHL can do to make this thing, at least. I mean, even MLS has kind of taken over the National Hockey League at this point in terms of overall numbers, but I don't know. I mean, if anybody out there has the magic potion to what could help the game resonate on a national scale, let me know.
Well, you know what? I'm wondering if the magic potion could be people like Charles Barkley. Neel, I know that you're a big basketball fan, and my assumption is that you didn't catch the Spitting Chicklets hockey podcast, but Charles Barkley was a guest. And just to give you some insight, the Spitting Chicklets podcast is a very, very brash, very vulgar podcast involving a fourth line. Ryan Whitney did win a couple of Stanley Cups with Tony's Pittsburgh Penguins.
No, he didn't.
Was that?
Sorry, I didn't mean to fact check you live, but he did not. No, he actually was traded right before we won our first cup with the Sidney Crosby era for Chris Kunitz.
He did. Didn't he win a cup though? Was he with Tampa?
No.
Okay.
That's why his part of the podcast shtick is hilarious. How Ryan Whitney talks about it all the time. How he was dealt right before they started winning cups. So that's one of the funny things I like about Ryan Whitney.
The Penguins, is he?
Exactly. But he has fun with it. He's not delirious like DeRozan is and thinks that the Raptors still would have won a championship.
Yeah, I mean, we could get to that. Because
Sorry,
I heard that. No. Hey, listen, that's what this podcast is about. I mean, it's guys talking sports, and I heard that DeRozan comment. And if you guys have some time, maybe we could have a chat about that a little later. But
okay,
yeah,
Neel, before you take over, Charles Barkley, people like Charles Barkley doesn't really comment much about hockey. And the knowledge that he did have was very obvious. He mentioned about the Patrick Kane trade to New York. He talked about the current run of the playoffs. He even mentioned that one of the more emotional days while he was with Philadelphia was the death of Flyers goaltender Pelle Lindbergh. You don't really get that kind of comment and passion from people outside of the hockey community. I'm thinking that the NHL needs more of that. What say you?
I totally agree. Actually, I mean, I'm not sure if anyone put him up to it, or or if this is just him coming out and actually just speaking about it because he respects the game of hockey, which I'm sure he does, because he clearly talks about it on Inside the NBA. He makes hockey references. He had that joke about a player got hit in the face with a puck, and he says if anyone in the NBA got 75 stitches, they'd retire.
Yeah.
And I think a guy like Chuck, who has almost like this, he's like universally beloved as this dopey stooge kind of guy who has the smarts, but he's a comedian as well. He's a very appealing guy, as we all know. So when he talks about it, people who don't really pay attention to hockey, their radars go up a little. Then maybe, they see that a hockey game's on national TV in the playoffs, and they watch it for a little while. They see the excitement that playoff hockey can bring, in my opinion, even though I may watch more basketball, I think playoff hockey overtime is probably up there with the most exciting situations that sport can offer. In general, sport can offer. It's the best overtime of any sport, in my opinion. And I mean, so raising the awareness of people that are not hockey fans is one thing. How high the ceiling can get in a southern market is a totally other thing. And I do think that it's not a coincidence that, in Canada, we all love hockey, and there's a lot of snow and ice here. In countries with a lot of snow and ice, they tend to love hockey across the world. And in countries around the equator or south of it, it's not really too much of a thing. And I think partly it seems like too much of a foreign concept, so to speak. And not generalizing, but down there in the southern United States, you have a lot of people with narrow views on a lot of things. And if they see a lot of snow and ice, it doesn't look like the place that they come from, and it maybe doesn't look so appealing. Maybe the access for their children is not the same as it would be in somewhere in Canada or in the northern United States, to further kind of build that community spirit around this game that we love so much,
And sorry, Tony, please.
I'm just saying it's culture, right? It comes down to culture, what you grow up in, Now, our culture here growing up was hockey, but since the Raptors came in, you see that shift in the demographic, that love for basketball. It's real, it's tangible, it's in our hands. So a guy like Charles Barkley doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt the game whatsoever to have him speak highly of it. What I loved about it, I ended up listening to the podcast yesterday when I got your lineup. I wanted to listen to it, but when you put it on the lineup, I'm like, oh shit, this is a good chance for me to listen to it. The way he sells the playoffs was, I thought, spot on. That you're not going to get a better entertainment product in sports than hockey playoffs. And the way he sold that, and the way he talked about talking to the TNT executives about getting on board and purchasing hockey. I loved his joke about, I'm a rich guy who's got cable, but I couldn't find OLN when it was on the NHL a few years back, which I thought was brilliant. So it doesn't hurt. And the prospects of having a Snoop Dogg owning, being part of an ownership group for the Ottawa Senators doesn't hurt, the league by any stretch of the imagination, for sure. I thought it was a good interview, and it is legit. I mean, he's a guy who's always spoken highly of Canada, Canadians, his relationship with hockey players. I had a chance to meet him during the NBA final.
Really?
And during NBA All-Star weekend. And just a naturally gregarious guy, just a really nice dude. Yeah, we would serve the TNT box. They had their own separate box at work, for the talent. They'd have a place to go and hang out.
Right.
And he's just a genuinely nice guy. So yeah, it doesn't hurt. And Charles Barkley I'm a huge fan of Charles Barkley. I love that man.
If I can, that's a great point, Tony, you brought up about, just like, basketball in Canada. Like, Vince Carter, as much as I do think that basketball was already on its way up, and would have eventually gotten the popularity it deserved, Vince Carter, the fact that the Raptors were able to get him and he instantly became the most popular player in the league for us, for a Canadian team, that definitely was had a supercharging effect on the rate of rise of Canadian basketball and the influence on all these. Now you see the product, these young players that are coming in, who a lot of them have memories of Vince in their early years, or even in some cases their older brothers or dads watching Vince, and how he brought this, how he influenced them indirectly or directly. And it just makes me think on the thing we were just discussing about Southern NHL teams, and touched on Arizona there, Randy, at the start, is like, what if Arizona had been able to draft Connor McDavid or Austin Matthews, the hometown boy Austin Matthews, by the way, from Arizona? You may see that, I don't recall an A level star that's been for and remind me if there was one, but has the Coyotes ever had an A level star to really build them up? Because stars sell. We know that any sport, that's one constant, is that stars sell.
Well, no, and that's exactly what we were going to bring up with regards to the Arizona Coyotes, because they have not had a successful run since they moved from Winnipeg. And we'll definitely touch on, we could get to it at this point in time right now, because the Leafs and the Raptors will be looking at their rosters, and they do have a couple of big decisions to make. And they will be looking for a new head coach. A couple of interesting names have been rumored. You think Becky Hammon, you think about Steve Nash recently. But with regards to the Leafs, you think about who's going to fill the vacant GM role, as the team has decided not to re-sign Kyle Dubas. Neel, you brought up Austin Matthews, and we'll get to that in a moment, especially what somebody like him could do for his hometown team in Arizona. But with regards to roster versus roster, who do you think should overhaul their roster more between the Leafs and the Raptors? Obviously, there's only a couple of pieces from the 19 championship team for Toronto, for the Raptors, that being, of course, Siakam, Van Vliet to a lesser degree, Chris Boucher. OG Anunoby is still on the roster and was on the championship team, but he didn't play. And, you think about the Leafs, you think about the core four of Matthews, Nylander, Marner, and Tavares. Morgan Riley is signed long-term. But this is a group that collectively has won one playoff series as a member of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Who do you think will be looking at a fresh look come next season, roster-wise?
I absolutely think, it's going to be the Raptors. The Raptors are the team that needs to overhaul. The Leafs, I'll get to them in a second, but overhaul is not the word that I would necessarily use for what the Leafs have to do. More like fine-tuning or retuning in their case. But the Raptors, this team is at its wit's end. We talked about it on the last pod. It just doesn't mesh. They have a bunch of good cogs, but these cogs do not fit together to create a well-oiled machine. And we got too many guys that in concert with each other. The way that we had this team with one of the worst half-court offenses that we've seen, and just I think the people of Toronto are a little bit over it, and we want to see what's next. And as we talked about the last time, it just seems like a perfect opportunity to go the route of Oklahoma City or Utah, really with that fresh start, some good young pieces, and build the right way. While the rest of the league is fighting it out, we will have a chance to sort of start peaking when everyone else is slowing down. So I do think that's the way the Raptors will go. And as far as the Leafs, it's definitely another disappointment for Toronto. And I think it's just bolstered by the fact that we really do have an excellent core. Other than Tavares, one could argue, being maybe later into his prime or just after. The other four guys that you mentioned, Riley, Marner, Nylander, and Matthews, all of these guys are in or near their prime. And I think that you don't let something like that go. You have to shape a product around it that enhances what you have there. Not to say that all of those guys should necessarily come back. You may look at improving your goaltending or your overall defensive depth or something like that. But it's hard for me to imagine they're going to overhaul this, but I could see a situation where one or two of these guys is not on the roster for very much longer.
You know, Tony, I just wonder if the Raptors still have a bit of a grace period because of the championship. And not to say that because if you take a look at the Raptors core pieces, I mean, Siakam, Van Vliet, and Trent Jr.'s contracts are up at the end of the 24 season, and Anunoby's contract is up at the end of the 25 season. What is Scotty Barnes? Is he a franchise changing? Is he that much of a difference maker? Can you put your franchise on somebody like Scotty Barnes? I'm thinking, though, if you overhaul this team and Scotty Barnes is still there, there's not much of a desire for Scotty Barnes to stick around. That being said, the Leafs, it's been close to 20 years, and they won one playoff series, and they were ceremoniously dismissed by the Panthers. And some can even argue that the Leafs didn't even show up for that series. With regards to who is more under the microscope, I'm still thinking it's the Leafs, because Matthews and Nylander their contract is up after next season. Tavares is up after the 25 season. Who knows where Austin Matthews is going to go, but there is a possibility that he may not return with Toronto.
Well, let's be clear. The Leafs will always be more under the microscope than the Toronto Raptors in this market. However, I agree with Neel. The Raptors are ready for a rebuild, and Scotty Barnes is a key piece of that rebuild. And I think he'd be okay with that being the focal point. Do they have a grace period because of their championship? Yeah, we'll look at that championship fondly forever, but we understand that the pieces from that championship are slowly but surely, fading, gone. Contracts are up. We're not looking at that champion. You fired the coach from that championship team. It's time to rebuild it and then find a good coach. I'm a fan of Monty Williams, the Phoenix Suns coach that was let go. I think he could be the right fit for, a rebuild here, but I'm jumping the gun. Where the Leafs are concerned, the guy who takes the job, the person who comes in and becomes the next general manager of the Leafs, has to be bold, has to make those bold decisions. The way I look at this team, John Tavares is untradeable with his age, his contract, his cap hit. I think you're going to have to do everything you can to keep Austin Matthews, because first-line centermen are not easy to find in hockey. You have one, and I think he's getting better, even though he too was quiet in the second round. I think you really have to look at Marner and Nylander as the two guys that you look to improve your team in other areas and retool and go from there and see what happens. This is a team that's still capable of making the playoffs, and you never know, once you get into the playoffs, anything is possible, I guess, but you certainly can't get back into it with the core four again. This core four that we talk about. The Raptors are ready for a rebuild, and the scrutiny is always going to be on the Leafs in this city. You know that.
Well, absolutely. And, you take a look at what has taken place in especially the Panthers series. Uh, Austin Matthews did have, he was a presence during the Tampa series, but throughout his career, Austin Matthews really hasn't done much. How bold would it be to trade an Austin Matthews? Because as Neel kind of alluded to it before, how great would it be to have Austin Matthews, especially in the Sun Belt, like within the Southern United States? His home state is Arizona. Arizona will be at Mullet Arena for, I believe they are locked in for 2 more seasons, Tony. Correct me if I'm wrong. But
Definitely next season. I know that for sure, but I'm not sure if it's 2. But you could be right. I'm not 100% sure.
Tony, I don't know if it's fair to do this kind of comparison, but I always wondered if MLS had missed marketing Michael Bradley, because here was a captain for the U.S. men's team. He even scored a goal for South Africa during World Cup South Africa. But then he signs with Toronto FC, albeit that he did win an MLS Cup with TFC, made the MLS Cup final 3 times. But I wonder how much a Michael Bradley would appeal more if he was on a U.S.-based team. That being said, Austin Matthews, an American from Arizona, let's say that he went to not only the Coyotes, but the Vegas Golden Knights. That sounds like a marketing dream. Or is that just too easy to say?
Michael Bradley is a defensive center midfielder. So, I mean, his position alone doesn't scream out entertainment, right? And that's no knock to Michael Bradley. I'm a huge fan of Michael Bradley's, and I love the impact he's made to Toronto FC in the city, and he deserves a lot more respect. But yeah, I mean, everybody talks about this pipe dream of him returning to his home state, but I believe Austin Matthews when he says he wants to stay here. I just don't think he's interested in signing long-term deals. I think he wants to leave his contract situation open to make more money, which is fine. That's the athlete of today. That's where they look at it. But his earning potential off the ice is far greater in Toronto, especially if he could lead this team to a Stanley Cup, than it would be in Arizona. With all due respect to the Coyotes and the whole dream of going back to your home state to play, this is the place for him. And again, if you explore trading Austin Matthews, what are you getting back for him? And how do you replace that first line center position that more than 50% of the teams in the NHL cover?
Well, okay. Now, very quickly, though, you mentioned that the earning power that Austin Matthews could have would be in Toronto. What about if he went to the Rangers? What if he went to the Blackhawks? What if he did go to an original 6 team, Detroit? It doesn't necessarily have to be Arizona, but let's say he finds his way to Dallas, for example. I think
he would be second fiddle to whoever's playing for the Cowboys. He'd be third fiddle to whoever's playing for the Knicks or the Jets or the Yankees. He'd be all right in Montreal if you wanted to go there. Detroit,
Messier
market.
Messier for the Rangers. I mean, he was a pretty big dog in when he won the cup with.
But he still wasn't bigger than Patrick Ewing. He still wasn't bigger than Derek Jeter. That's the reality of where hockey's at in terms of the needle. There aren't too many markets in the States where he'd be the guy, right? The standalone. Pittsburgh, he would have a chance if he went there. I mean, they look at Mario as the greatest athlete in Penguins history, but even then, you still have the guys who will fight for Bradshaw tooth and nail, or Mean Joe Green, or Roberto Clemente, even though his life was short and tragically ended earlier than it should have. But there's a chance there. But not too many markets down there that would put Austin Matthews on that pedestal, right? That where he has here in Toronto.
And of course, Tony, you are a big Pittsburgh Penguins fan, has been a fan since I've known you, which is knocking on 20 years now. And of course, the Penguins did not make the playoffs, and there's some big questions that need to be answered for next season. Is a rebuild even possible with Crosby and Malkin on that team? Or do you think, what do you think is more likely? Crosby and or Malkin being traded, or a rebuild fully taking place?
The only way they get traded is if they want it to happen. And I don't know about Malkin. You know, he's a different cat. He's a guy who walks to the beat of his own drum. I think he likes his spot in Pittsburgh. I can with 100% guarantee tell you that Sidney Crosby will not play for another franchise in National Hockey League. Barring something catastrophic happening, I think it's really important to him to play with one franchise from start to finish. What the Penguins need is to try and find the right pieces to surround this team that they've decided to commit to, like the older guys they've decided to commit to. So the new guy, whoever they hire, it could be Kyle Dubas, from what I'm hearing. That person has to try and rebuild the bottom six to help out, and try and build a prospect pool for the future for when these guys retire, which is not too far away. So it is an impossible task. It's a difficult task. I don't know why anybody would want to take that job. The only reason is because there's going to be a lot of money involved in it and complete autonomy of the hockey operations. But the Pittsburgh Penguins are stuck in a rut right now, right? They have an aging core. They have a bunch of no movement clauses. Their bottom six, not helpful. And very, 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 very thin prospect pool, like
right.
Olsen twins, like thin, right? Not much going on. So, I mean, if Kyle Dubas, let's say, for example, takes that job, he'll be getting paid a pretty penny, and he's going to have a complete control of the hockey operations. And that's about all he can say about taking that job. I do not. I don't envy anybody taking that job.
Would you even get excited if Kyle Dubas took that job?
You know what? I think he's a smart guy. I think he's a visionary. He certainly knows how to add to a core. I mean, I think he's done a good job with that. It just hasn't worked out. His problem in Toronto has been the core, not who he's added around the core. He's also had some issues with, contract negotiations. He hasn't necessarily won all of them. Excuse me, but I'd be okay with it. I wouldn't have a problem with it. I just don't know what he could do to help the team right now. So essentially, you're hiring a guy to take a job on, to kind of go through the motions for a few years until your core gets older. Sorry, there was a delivery coming at my mom's house, and the dude in the truck he got out of his van while it was still moving.
Oh, seriously? Okay.
And I'm watching it happen in real time.
Hey, can you flip the camera? Can you flip the camera over? Next time when that happens, Tony.
Sorry. So it's not an enviable job. Thank you. Don't forget the brakes. So it's not an enviable job. I don't know what you gain from it.
Yeah.
No, that was almost a live episode of Spittin' Chicklets you just caught there, Tony.
The only thing missing was the F-bombs, Neel.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it would be something if a team like the Penguins went from Lemieux to Crosby to let's say they even get Austin Matthews. I mean, that's far from reality at this point. But obviously, one of the most storied franchises in the United States, Tony's Pittsburgh Penguins. One team that is not a storied franchise by any stretch, guys, is the Arizona Coyotes. They did move from Winnipeg to Phoenix in the mid-90s, and really it's been a disaster ever since. And they went from America West Arena, which I believe is in downtown Phoenix, lack of a better term. Then they moved to the suburb of Glendale, and now they are at a 5,000-seat stadium at Arizona State University, hoping to get a new arena, and the city of Tempe said no mas. So, Tony, we'll go back to you for a moment. Arizona has not had anything to cheer about. You take a look at since they've been to Arizona, they did make one conference final, but has won a qualifying round that during the bubble, and really have not had much to cheer about by regular standards. However, this is a community that did create, build Austin Matthews. Leaf prospect Matthew Nyes was showing some real flashes during the playoffs, and then he was injured. And it would have been interesting to see how he would have progressed during this playoff stretch. I believe Tage Thompson is from Arizona as well. Is it really easy to say, Tony, that Arizona and the Phoenix area is not a hockey market? Because the way that I see it is that if Arizona did have something to cheer about, if they did win one cup, let alone three, like they have done in Tampa, Colorado has won a couple of cups. They've won three as well. I'm thinking that a lot more people in the Phoenix, Arizona area would gravitate towards this team, but they just haven't had anything to cheer about.
Yeah, for sure. Like I said before when we were talking about the southern markets, winning helps. It always helps. But how long are you going to prop this fucking thing up? Excuse my language. I mean, when is Gary Bettman ready to park his ego and say, we got to take an L here, right? Like we had a beautiful brand spanking new building built in Glendale, Arizona, and it was a complete failure. Now, if they had better hockey teams, if they were winning, that would have changed things? Maybe, but from what I heard, the area they put the arena in Glendale is similar to Canada in Ottawa, where it's just a bitch to get out there if you're from the Phoenix area. So when are you ready to cut it loose? It doesn't seem to be working for whatever reason. And, at least in places like Tampa or Dallas, you're able to find stable ownership who sticks with it, and eventually they get there. You can't even get that in Phoenix right now. It's just, you can't find the proper ownership. So what do you do? How long do you hang on to it? You got Patrick Mahomes. Speaking of guys, who could help grow the league in terms of their market value, you got Patrick Mahomes tweeting out, hey, we got an arena here in Kansas City ready to go whenever the Coyotes are ready to move. Maybe look at that as a business venture, that if he's involved in ownership of an NHL team, does that help the league, right? How long are you willing to go to keep propping this thing up? Eventually you got to park your ego and say, this is not working. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I think it goes beyond winning. It's just an area that is not, they just don't seem interested.
Well, Neel, I just thought of something as Tony was speaking. And I mean, Tony, everything that Tony said is bang on. And as we had discussed, there is a ownership group that is trying to buy the Ottawa Senators. Why not try and buy the Arizona Coyotes. And, the question that I originally wanted to pose to you was, which city makes the most sense because it just seems inevitable that the Arizona Coyotes will be moving out of Arizona. There are a number of cities that potentially could host, who can where this team could be relocated. But as I'm really interested to hear where you think Arizona may move to, why Ottawa? Why is Snoop and Donovan Bailey, Olympic gold medalist? Apparently, he's being rumored to be a part of the ownership group with Snoop Dogg. I mean, Ryan Reynolds. I mean, he was being rumored to purchase the Senators as well. There still might be, well, maybe not so much in Phoenix, but I mean, there still could be an ownership opportunity for that franchise in Arizona.
I mean, maybe so, but like Tony was alluding to, I guess that's why they maybe changed their name from the Phoenix Coyotes to the Arizona Coyotes, because no one in Phoenix wanted to go to the game. And so, I mean, who would want to get into what seems like a toxic situation as far as how if the city and the team and the community, the fan base, don't really see eye to eye, especially in a off-market sort of situation, like an out of typical market for hockey place like Arizona, you're not going to get too much success, or there's always going to be someone that's one of those parties that is trying to maybe, not have as much interest in the longevity of this partnership. As far as teams that, where would the best place for an NHL team like that be? Well, I was caught, I was like, is it Birmingham, Alabama? Is it Albuquerque, New Mexico? None of these places. How are you going to possibly predict? In those off-market type places, anywhere you put it, you're going to have the city all in. You're going to have the team all in. And there's got to be something that tells you that, well, we're going to, get this fan base coming along and everything is lining up perfectly. And I just don't know where that is, to be quite honest. It seems like the Kraken, for example, the Golden Knights, you mentioned the Lightning before, and even now, like teams like, I mean, the Panthers have a long history of off and on success, but you get a superstar like Tkachuk in there, and he's just overhauling everything over there. It seems like overnight. But I'd have to say, like, I couldn't tell you a place in the States that a hockey team would do great. Seattle was the obvious answer that maybe had come to mind. It's a huge city, north. But to be honest, put more Canadian teams in the league. I want to see Quebec City with a team again. I want to see Hamilton with a team. If there's any metropolitan area that could take two teams on, I mean, the Leafs get so much attention. I'm sure they'd like to give some of that to Hamilton because they don't do too well with
it. Well, you know what? I like it. It's funny. You mentioned Quebec and Toronto, and I don't think Toronto would work at all. Hamilton might be a different story because they have a different identity, and they, from what I have observed, they have their own identity as opposed to Toronto, but not a Mississauga, not a Markham, which are suburbs of the greater Toronto area. Tony, this is a community, and I'm talking about Toronto, of course, that if it's all Leafs, maybe you have a portion of Montreal Canadiens fans, to a lesser degree, Pittsburgh Penguins fans like yourself. Maybe there might be a little bit more Boston Bruin fans, but this is a community that already has developed their loyalties. And this is also a community that has seen their team won one playoff series in the past 19 years and have not won a Stanley Cup since 1967. When that time comes, the three of us will probably be dead by the time that happens. But who is actually going to cheer for this second team in Toronto? If you ask me, Kansas City, I think, is a great possibility. I'm really interested with Portland, Oregon, because you have a a geographic rival, not only with the Seattle Kraken, the Vancouver Canucks. I'm not sure how close Calgary is, but tack on a couple of hours, you got Edmonton there as well. I don't see Quebec working out either. Do you have a different opinion, Tony?
Well, I think Quebec can work, but I don't think it's going to work as a relocation for Phoenix. I think if they're going to relocate the Phoenix Coyotes, I would imagine they want to stay out at the very least the Midwest, right? So Kansas City, Houston. You're saying Portland. There was the owner of the Utah Jazz threw out a tweet saying, "We're ready to take you on." At this point, in my opinion, anywhere but Phoenix is going to work right now. Paducah, Mississippi. I don't know, but it's just give it a shot at this point. Stop with the Phoenix. I don't think it's going to work. It's not working.
Well, and I think the NHL is finally starting to realize that. So, guys, we will step away from hockey and talk a little bit about basketball, and of course, some very distressing news coming out of Memphis as John Morant has posted another controversial video of him flashing a gun. And for the second time in give or take 90 days. And he did get a brief suspension the first time, and it seems that more punishment will be levied. There has been talk of him potentially missing half the season. Sponsors are pulling out as well. Neel, as a big basketball fan, how do you think the league should handle this situation? Do you think John Morant should be suspended? You're on mute there, Neel.
Gotcha. Yeah, the short answer is yes, I do think that he deserves to be suspended, if not only for the fact that he already was suspended. And they even showed some leniency with the fact that through his being away from the team, they sort of backdated the suspension so that he'll really only had to serve 2 games from when he was ready to come back, 2 games more. And then he went and did it again. And I understand it was not him that pulled out the phone. It was one of his knucklehead friends. I'll get into that in a sec. But he put himself in a position to easily be caught under the microscope again. And that was probably the very thing that Adam Silver sat down with him and said is, well, it comes down to a few things with Morant. The first thing is just immaturity. He's a young kid. We've all been kids. We've all done things. I was taught that you're a winner if you make mistakes and learn from them. And you're really only a loser is if you make mistakes, but you keep making them. And right now, he's on that path a little bit. I have a feeling he'll turn it around. But, to quote the great Uncle Ben, for all you Spider-Man fans out there, with great power comes great responsibility. And Ja has not yet grasped that concept, even though I'm sure it was drilled into his head by a whole number of parties after the first instance. He still found himself within a week after getting eliminated by LeBron in a car with one of his friends, making a video while his friend's driving, making this video, and he's pulling out a gun as they're driving. So I think the second point here is the inner circle. And who are these people that are around him? Because by all accounts, he didn't grow up in a very impoverished circumstances. He had a good family, a full family unit that supported him the whole way through. His dad comes to every game. And his dad almost seems like one of his homies too, but who are his friends? Because either they are complete idiots that have no introspection about who Ja is and the influence of when they pull out their phone, what that could mean to his career, his life, his pocket. Or they really don't have his best interests in mind and he doesn't realize that. Because those are the only 2 explanations that I can come up with as to why your best friend or one of your good friends that you're comfortable enough to be in a car with pulling out guns for fun you'd have to be very close to that type of person, perhaps, and they clearly don't have your best interests in mind or don't understand what they need to do to have those interests at mind. And then I guess the third thing is just his own introspection. When will Ja learn that, you know, he is a role model to millions of kids around the world? You do not get a Nike signature shoe with a commercial playing prime time in the playoffs unless you have that sort of influence, and unless you are projected to have a much greater influence on a future basis. So he needs to be suspended. He needs to be punished. And I think there's a reason that the players union and the owners union give the commissioner so much wide-ranging powers, is that so when the image of the league is in question, he can do pretty much anything he wants to pretty much anyone he wants. And that's what is going to happen to Ja.
You know, Tony, obviously, you and I have had some great discussions over the years of various social issues. And as many people within the NBA community do believe that Ja Morant should be suspended, one person who was a real critic of the criticism levied on Ja Morant was JJ Redick, who is become quite a broadcaster himself within the basketball community. And JJ Redick said, amongst other things, and I am paraphrasing, is that he didn't do anything illegal. And as that may be up for debate, maybe even be up for debate tonight amongst the three of us, I was wondering if you did agree with JJ Redick, number one, and if you do, if the criticism amongst Ja Morant is a sign of cancel culture. Because I, for one, do not understand. I mean, I know on a high level about gun possession, but as a Canadian, myself, as well as all three of us, don't really have a knowledge to own a firearm. And with what Ja Morant did in the two videos, is it essentially cancel culture? I'll just leave it at there. Floor is yours.
I don't think that's cancel culture at all. And look, JJ Redick's right. He did nothing illegal. And I've grown to really understand what the Second Amendment means to the people of the United States of America, those who own guns. And I don't even have a problem with him owning a gun. That's their right. Let's take it to an uncomfortable spot here. Ja Morant is a young, rich, famous black man in Memphis. He's a target. That's just the reality of it.
A target for criticism, or
no? He's a target as a young, rich, famous black man in a place like Memphis where crime is high and jealousy reigns supreme. He's a target, so he feels he needs to protect himself. Paul Pierce spoke to this. You remember Paul Pierce got stabbed 9 times in a club. He felt like he was a target. Next thing you know, he's strapped. This is the life they live and they have to go through. And I understand that. However, you're worth $200 million, my man. Go get yourself a security team like LeBron James has, like some of the upper echelon guys in the league have. Go get it. Now, I don't think it's cancel culture, Randy, because I think this is going to be an attempt to try and save Ja from himself as well. Right? Because you're making yourself a target. You're putting yourself out there. I mean, for Christ's sakes, one of the leaders of the Crips put a video out, threatening Ja Morant, saying, "You're not about that life. Don't put yourself in our shoes." And those are the harmful things he could bring to himself. He could bring to his friends. He could bring to his family. I'm not even looking at the money. You have a lot of these guys on ESPN, like, Stephen A. Smith, who say, look at the money you're wasting. Look at the money you're potentially giving up. Forget the money. Think about yourself. Think about your life. And think about the influence you have over millions and millions of kids, like Neel was talking about, who are from the inner cities, who are from those parts of America where you're supposed to be giving them hope. You're not supposed to be promoting that lifestyle to them, right?
Should he be suspended?
Yeah, for sure he should be suspended. This is about your representation of the business of the league, and you managed to fuck up less than 2 months after you did the same thing. Nobody would give a shit if he owned a gun or not. Nobody would know what he does in his spare time, and nobody cares. But but once that record goes on, and there you are flashing your gun in front of everybody, you make it the business of the NBA, and you make it the business of the Memphis Grizzlies. It's that simple. Whether we think it's cancel culture or not, it's not. You represent a multi-billion-dollar business, and there's a certain way of acting that you need to maintain. Now, there's a million holes in this. I grant you. I think I know what you're trying to say, Randy, but there's a million different hypocrisies within all this, because the NBA is kind of in bed with the hip hop music, which promotes a culture of, violence. And these great hip hop stars are sprinkled all over courtside of NBA games. So I understand where people's confusion comes from. Is like, why are we making this kid to be so evil when you guys are in bed with the type of music that promotes that kind of culture? I get all that. But Ja Morant, I think they're attempting to save him from himself, right? They want to give him the opportunity to enjoy the career that he deserves, that he's worked hard for, by teaching him a lesson, saying, hey, listen, get yourself straight. You are not that person. You don't need to live that life. You don't need to promote that lifestyle. You could be an influence to millions of kids without promoting that lifestyle. And so that's why, yeah, he deserves a suspension. I think he'll get it, half the season, maybe. I think they'll go that deep with it. And I think it's going to turn out to be a good thing for him. I think it'll be a good wake-up call. You know what I mean? And I applaud him being friends with the people he grew up with. I got no problem with that, right? It's not on them to rein him in. It's on him to let them realize that, hey, if you want this, if you want us to have a good time together, these are certain things we need to do. Like I said, go get a fucking security team. You can afford it, for Christ's sakes. Drive in the backseat of the car, have guys surrounding you, ex-FBI agents, ex-CIA agents, ex-police officers. Do what LeBron does. That's why you never hear of any gun charges with LeBron. Play things right. And the last point I want to make here, his parents, there's other incidences that have been reported. Nothing came to fruition in terms of crime, like in terms of indictments. But his mother is at a mall having an argument with a Foot Locker employee. And what does she do? She calls him to say, hey, come down here. And he comes and causes havoc. Don't put your son in that position. Do not put your child in that position.
Truthfully, I don't know the I don't know the essence of that story, as well as the video by the Crips, but definitely interested to learn more about it. But as you're talking about a security detail for Ja Morant and famous athletes, celebrities, I'm still wondering if this is avoidable. And I'm not trying to be a contrarian here, but the first go around, he was at a strip joint, and maybe whether he had a couple of drinks in him, that remains to be seen. But he's the second time he's with one of his buddies, and it doesn't appear that he needed to use that gun at all. Now, if he had to defend himself and somebody had their camera out, that's another thing. But I just wonder, and I don't know if this is a question that can be answered truly, but does a security detail make a difference?
Oh, absolutely. It devoids you of having to be involved in anything. Let me give you an example. I worked the Drake concert one night at the Scotiabank Arena, and there was an entire section with LeBron James and his crew. They were in Toronto. They were in town. This was right after they won the championship with the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Hmm.
He had his detail around. LeBron, the whole night, all he was doing was dancing and having a blast. I kept looking.
And sorry to interrupt here. Can you give a perspective of where LeBron was? Like, was he on the floor? Was he in a box?
He was on the floor. He was on the floor.
Okay.
He was on the floor, and there was a cordon off area. But he actually would leave the elevated area that they had for him and his party, and would go down to the floor. People are walking by constantly, but he had 3 security guards around him. One of them was holding his drink, for Christ's sakes. And he was dancing and having the time of his life. And not once did there look to be any kind of threat whatsoever towards him. And he wasn't looking for it either, right? It's perception. It's how it looks, right? When you're glorifying the fact that you have that thing, you are bringing on undue attention. And that's what the Memphis Grizzlies don't want. And that sure as hell is not what the NBA wants. Now, you can call the NBA hypocrites. I get it. There's a different argument. There's an argument to be made on how involved your employer should be on things you're doing outside of the workplace. But this is not a regular job. You know, this is not Tony flashing a gun on Instagram Live in St. Joseph's Hospital having a problem. St. Joseph's Hospital is not going to know that I'm doing it because I'm a nobody. It's a different story. You have a different level of responsibility when you're John Morant. So you've got to be careful of those things. So no, it's not cancel culture. It's just, I honestly believe that this is an attempt to help this kid out. Nobody wants to see him out of the league. Nobody wants to see him fail. Nobody wants to see him not be an active player in the NBA. But he needs a good, slap in the face, not literal, figuratively, to wake up.
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback on that, Ja is one of the top 10 most popular basketball players in the world. And his ranking is it was only trending up from there. All the kids love this guy. And I mean, to jump on what Tony said there, guys like John Morant, when you have things like Supermax contracts, $200 million contracts that you're giving to a guy in his young 20s, he obviously has to have the ability, which he definitely has. But the NBA, just like every other sport, and to the highest degree, I believe, in the NBA, this is the most star-driven league that there is, more so than the NFL, NHL, MLB, and probably every other sport that you can think of, just because of how the elite level or tier of superstars in popularity, I'm not saying skill, because I wouldn't put Kyrie Irving up there in the terms of championship level type players, but he is of the most popular. And when you have that level of popularity and you have all the perks of being an NBA superstar, what that's gotten you, it's an understanding that the league has with these guys that we scratch your back, you scratch ours, which is to say we're making you a lot of money and you're making us a lot of money, and we're in this together. And any disruption of the family, like, not to use like a Godfather or Goodfellas term, but you go against the family and you sleep with the fishes. And like you said, Morant is nowhere near sleeping with the fishes figuratively, but they're dipping his toes in, and they need to, so he knows how cold the water is down there.
How long would you suspend him?
Exactly.
Sorry to interrupt there, Tony, but
no.
Neel, I don't think I got your take on how long he should be suspended for. If at all.
I think half a season, it might be a little bit excessive. I wouldn't argue with it, because then it would really be Adam Silver sending a strong message to not only the other players in the league, but to future players entering the league. It'll always be, this is the Ja moment. And they'll, at every rookie sort of symposium where they tell them about the ills, they bring the former vets in, the guys who are broke or didn't manage their finances, the guys who made mistakes. They bring these guys in and they give these rookies all their game about how to be a professional, how to avoid women who don't have your best interests in mind, how to spot friends and family that don't have your best interests in mind. Ja received these talks too. from all the vets. Maybe he was on his phone not paying attention, but he did receive that. And you know, I would say a good 20 games, 100%. To go 40 plus is a stretch, but I think within 20 to 30 games is very reasonable and probably appropriate.
Honestly, if you ask me, I say kick him out for the year. I mean,
That's harsh.
sure, but I mean, let the punishment fit the crime. And maybe there wasn't a crime, but the NBA did have a real black eye when Gilbert Arenas was a part of the Washington Wizards. And I'm sure the three of us, and, you know, Tony not even being a hardcore basketball fan, I'm sure you know of the situation that took place with the Washington Wizards close to 20 years ago, and Javaris Crittenton. But I mean, that was in a quote unquote controlled environment in the arena during practice. But John Morant is out in public, and that he was already spoken to once, and that this is one of your prize players in your league, such an exciting player, and it would hurt, but short-term pain, long-term gain. I could appreciate JJ Redick's comments, but the NBA is a private league, and people so much on whether they have the right to work there or it's a privilege to work there, you know, they should have that ability to call the shots. And I really wonder how, if he was to come back halfway through the season, how revered he would be, especially in Memphis. Let's say that he comes back with a vengeance and has a great start to the season in the second half. Would all be forgotten? I
think so.
You think so?
I do. I think he's young enough, and I think he's still fresh, and I think people genuinely like. Look, JJ Redick. There's a lot of things that were flawed in what he said. They're not targeting him, you know. First of all, he's targeting himself. He puts himself on that video, or his friend puts that video up. You make the target directly on yourself. So the NBA isn't targeting him, but I think that genuinely everybody wants to see this kid come out of this in a good way. I really do believe it, because there is nothing there's nothing, you know, about his upbringing. There's no wicked past. All indications show that he's from a good family, a nuclear family, a family that was intact, father, mother together, living in the home, both working, middle class. So, do you know what I mean? I think
yeah.
I don't think they want to run this kid out of the league, but I think he needs a serious kick in the ass. And that's why I think at least half a season, hopefully, will do that for him.
You know, I just want to bring up Randy, you talked about Gilbert Arenas. And I would point out two stark contrasts between Gilbert, Agent Zero's move, where he brought guns into the locker room, and John Morant. Is that one thing is that he did bring the gun to the workplace, which is the NBA, on NBA facility. And there was an implied aggression to this move, that he was having a beef that maybe he would settle, or that was there for the purposes of settling something. Whereas John Morant didn't have that, in my opinion. He was a dumb kid, highly influenced, highly gullible by the culture that he had embedded into it, by his friends, by whatever he thought, pulling out a gun at a strip club and then pulling it out when he was alone with his friend in the car. There's no implied aggression to anyone in particular. It's an aggressive image. It's not something you want kids to see that are following him on social media. And the second thing is social media itself, and how wide-ranging a simple image can instantly go viral, like it did with John Morant. Whereas you never had the image that went viral with Gilbert. That level of
Well, I mean, you didn't have that image because social media wasn't a thing back then.
Exactly. So with social media, a company, an establishment, not just a company, but an American establishment like the NBA, they almost have a responsibility to themselves as well as to the general public to have a zero tolerance for anything that goes against the family, even on social media.
Well, it's definitely an image that the NBA, and rightfully so, would want to try and nix and rid themselves of this very shoddy image as soon as they possibly can. Guys, great discussion. Thank you so much. And we will end things off as we usually do with our rapid fire segment, and that is a big deal, no big deal. And Tony, we're going to talk about our beloved Toronto FC. And this season wasn't supposed to turn out the way that it has been. They're last in the conference. And, after signing the likes of Insigne, Bernadeschi, goalkeeper Sean Johnson, I think the writing was on the wall. They were going to make a run for another supporter shield, and who knows what was going to happen during the playoffs. But well, here they are, and it was reported that Lorenzo Insigne did not fly with the team for their recent road match against Austin FC. Tony, is that a big deal or no big deal?
Yeah, I think it's becoming a bloody big deal to excuse the pun there. This is, I say bloody big deal, and it's starting to look like Jermaine Defoe, the sequel. Now, the difference between Lorenzo Insigne and Jermaine Defoe was that I think Lorenzo wants this to work. Like, I think he's committed and wants it to work, but it just doesn't seem to be working. Whereas with Jermaine Defoe, he was scoring, he was producing, but he was homesick. He wanted to go back to Europe. The North American style of having to meet with the media after the game, and the 5-hour flights, road trips, it just wasn't for him. He wasn't down with it, and he wasn't moving on with it. This team is bad. It's bad. And from the beginning of the season, I kept saying, I don't know what they are. I don't know who they are. I don't know what I'm watching. And it doesn't look like they know what they are. And Bernadeschi went nuclear post game after the Austin, and he was pretty candid in his comments, saying that we have no idea what to do out there. Simple as that. Playing the long ball and not knowing what to do from there, it's not ideal for us. We are playing football without an idea. So not exactly a ringing endorsement to the coach, Bob Bradley. So I don't know where they go from here, because they have Bob Bradley hired as the head coach and the technical director. And so there is some conflict there, but something has to give. I will give them the benefit of the doubt. They are ravaged by injuries right now. It's not just Insigne. They've got important players like Oso and Matt Hedges out, and Michael Bradley, of course, who is still an important part of this team. But they've neglected the striker position. They have not filled it properly, and that's part of their issues as well. And here we are. And I don't know what the answer is. I still don't know what they are. And when one of your star players is basically saying it publicly, it's never a good sign for the coach. Who are you aligned with, right? You can't have the highest payroll in the entire league and be last place in your conference. So something's got to give.
Well, and Toronto FC's next match is on Saturday at BMO Field against DC United. And one page I'm looking at has Toronto favored to win that match. And DC is, they're in the middle of the conference there. So, yeah, definitely some very dire times for the Reds. Neel, it is getting closer and closer for the Miami Heat to return to the NBA Finals. And if that is the case, it would be another it would be a return to the NBA Finals for our native son, Kyle Lowry. Of course, Kyle Lowry was the face of the Toronto Raptors, as some pegged him the greatest Raptor of all time, leading the Toronto Raptors to the NBA championship in 2019. But as Kyle Lowry has obviously moved on from the Raptors, playing with the Miami Heat now, I kind of wondered what his legacy, if his legacy has changed at all, being this perceived greatest Raptor of all time. Let's say that Kyle Lowry wins a title with the Miami Heat. Is that a big deal or no big deal as it relates to his legacy and history with the Toronto Raptors?
It's a big deal, but not in the sense that like winning another. The Miami championship will never mean as much to a Toronto Raptors fan as the Toronto. It won't even come close. But what will mean something to all true fans of Lowry and the Raptors is that our boy got another championship. And, it's like almost like a family member that went off to do their own thing, that moved away to a new city, but there's always going to be love there. And you want that family member to succeed. You want your child or your father to succeed wherever they may go, because the love, that the bond that was created, you'll never not want that for them, no matter if you go and they're still around or vice versa. It's always going to be love. And,
I apologize for interrupting, Neel, but did you have that same sort of sentiment towards Kawhi Leonard? Because as I agree with you with regards to Kyle Lowry, for some reason, I don't want to see Kawhi Leonard win a championship with the Clippers.
It's definitely nothing close to the same, but I do wish Kawhi well, and will always be fond of Kawhi no matter what. So I'll never be mad that Kawhi won a championship, but it won't have an effect on me. Like, one of the things about Lowry, though, is that unlike Kawhi, Lowry was built with our team. In many ways, just like the Raptors, he came out the mud. No one wanted to be on the Raptors. No one wanted Lowry. He was getting tossed around between Memphis, then Houston. No one could really plug him in. He was a brash young kid that didn't listen, was uncoachable. We took him on, and we went from perpetual laughingstock. Bosch left us, went to Miami's winning championships. We're just out here in the dungeon of the East. Then we got him, and all of a sudden, we start to build the identity that goes from laughingstock to steady, consistent, mature, and tough team. All of the qualities that Lowry embodied, that sort of the Raptors started to embody with him as our leader, culminating in the championship. And I think that it's nice that he went to a team that, if you were to pick out a handful of guys in the league that fit the Heat culture, Lowry's 100% going to be that type of guy, that type of Heat culture guy, because he basically brought Heat culture to Toronto. Toronto culture was like Heat culture in a way when Lowry was our leader. And so it makes sense that he embodies now the qualities of the current team he's on, and they're far exceeding expectations that anyone could have had for them. And I love the fact that he's actually playing well and contributing to this run that they're having, because he's having a bunch of good games. He has on and off. They use him in various different ways. Spoelstra is proving himself to be the cream of the crop when it comes to coaches. And Butler is just, in my opinion, even if he doesn't win a title this year, he's in the running for greatest player of all time that has never won a title. Steve Nash, obviously, there's a number of other names, but he's really, really getting up there in the rankings of that particular category. And I just love to see Lowry on this team, and being and that he's a good voice in the locker room, a veteran voice. That those guys are rallying around him, including, and most importantly, Jimmy Butler, because there's probably not a single other player on that roster that looks up to another player that Jimmy would look up to other than Kyle on that team.
That's definitely valid. Do you think Kyle Lowry?
Can I say one more thing? Because I mentioned Nash, and you mentioned Nash possibly coming here to coach, all that sort of. When Nash left Phoenix, he almost signed with the Raptors. There was some talks there, and if he had done so, we would never have gone to Plan B Lowry. And thank God for you, Steve Nash, that you did not end up coming here.
Hey, don't
Well,
forget if James Nolan didn't nix the deal to the
Yeah,
Knicks, we wouldn't have Kyle Lowry either because
and that's
Masai was
because we
ready to let
fleeced,
him go.
and that's because we fleeced Dolan so hard on the Bargnani deal.
Bargnani,
He
that's right.
he had jitters.
That's right.
Oh man, see these fond memories, man, fond memories.
well, am I the only one that remembers a trade rumor? How valid it is? I mean, we'll never know. I heard a rumor that, and I believe Tony and I have chatted this once upon a time. Steve Nash and Dirk Nowitzki for Vince Carter and Antonio Davis.
Wow.
This
Was that the real
was
thing?
this was, I think, just after Vince won the slam dunk competition and the playoff round against the Knicks,
Yeah.
and it was obviously before Nash went to Phoenix and winning the MVPs. But it is something that I for one heard. Neel, it doesn't look like that you had heard that rumor. No. So it was one that I for one heard, all my years listening to sports radio. And but very quickly, Neel, do you think Lowry is the greatest Raptor of all time?
100%.
You real without a doubt. Wow.
1000%.
Because
The reason I say that goes beyond his play on the court. It's his toughness and his attitude that we needed more than any other intangible that any other player brought to us. And I'm going beyond the tangibles, beyond his skill level,
His longevity too, right? I mean,
longevity.
You have to factor in the fact that his longevity helps as well. 100%. I'm with you. I think he is right now.
The correct answer to me is Vince Carter. I'm sorry, I'm still on Vince. And, Tony and I have had discussions about this in the past, and I just wonder how much Kyle Lowry has moved the needle for kids today to pick up a basketball as opposed to Vince's legacy.
That's a completely different story. We're talking about what he's meant to the success of the franchise.
Right.
In terms of results, right? It's not just the championship. There was a couple of Eastern Conference final appearances as well. Like
Sure.
He brought an attitude to this team that no one else has. And in this city, we love that type of player, right? They still talk about Darcy Tucker in Toronto. They still talk about Ty Domi in Toronto. Now, Kyle Lowry is obviously a lot more talented overall as a player, but my point is that type of guy really resonates with a Toronto fan base. We loved Jose Bautista's toughness and swagger, and it's just that kind of intangible that Neel was talking about is what made him so special.
Sorry, Neel, please.
Oh no, I was just saying absolutely. The endearing qualities of Kyle Lowry, they just went so deep with our city, and he brought us the championship, which really validated every feeling that was both ways and every piece of doubt that he had along the way as well. All of that was just instantly invalidated. The doubt and all of the good things were instantly validated. And it just sort of was the perfect cap to what will be hard to top as the greatest. And it'll happen, hopefully in our lifetimes. But it's not going to be for a while.
Well, to your point, to counter Neel, I think you may agree with, both of you may agree with me on this, that Kyle Lowry would not have won that championship without Kawhi Leonard. And I mean, with regards to what Tony had mentioned, with regards to Vince's legacy and what Kyle Lowry has accomplished as a Raptor, I just think that yes, Kyle Lowry has done more as a member of the Toronto Raptors, mainly staying as long as he did, winning the playoff rounds and the championship that he did. But I just wonder if that will resonate with kids today. And I guess like the whole discussion about most valuable player, should it be renamed, like the generic trophy for whatever sport, most valuable player, should it be known as most outstanding player? Because there's always a debate on the legitimacy of said award, and it's an interesting discussion. I mean, I don't know if you guys want to even talk about DeMar DeRozan and his belief that
I think that a city like Toronto, from the 1970s onwards, outside of a couple of Jays championships, we didn't have much for such a huge metropolitan base with a number of sports teams. Outside of those 2 Blue Jays runs and some good teams along the way, some good Leafs teams, we didn't have winners, and he brought us a winner.
Well, I mean, Tony and I would argue that Toronto FC did have a winning culture, going to MLS Cup finals. But I mean, I guess, and to your point, Neel, with Toronto FC, there is a cult following. I went to the parade for TFC, and it certainly wasn't like the Raptors celebration, but there was thousands and thousands of people there, and following the procession, and Nathan Phillips Square had a good smattering of people. Again, it wasn't like the Raptors, and it certainly wouldn't be like if the Leafs won the championship. But I mean, you can't put TFC in the same breath, I suppose.
One thing I'll say, Randy, to the Vince Carter point is that if Vince Carter had brought the Raptors a championship, it would have been possibly a bigger deal than Lowry, a much bigger deal perhaps, because of the star power that Vince had internally. But I think just from a Toronto perspective, when you take out the rest of the world, this guy's toughness and his attitude and his sort of loyalty to us, unlike Vince, where there was conditions or questionable moments of his loyalty, of his effort. You never really had that with Lowry. He had limitations, but those limitations never went to his intangibles like they did with Vince Carter.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Well, guys, without question, the loyalty you have to this podcast is never in question. And guys, I just want to thank you so much for joining us, for joining me tonight. Tony, hope you have a great evening, and my very best to you and your family. Hope everything pans out well, and be sure to pass my best to your niece.
Appreciate that, man. Thank you very much.
Neel, once again, yeah, you bet. Neel, thanks so much, man. Hopefully, if the star isn't, if you're not getting asked by Spitting Chicklets or the steam room with Charles Barkley, hopefully you could join us another time.
Absolutely, we'd be more than happy to. It was a fun time and good chatting with you boys again.
Thanks so much. For Tony Antoniou and Neel Katarey, I'm Randy Kure. This is What's Up the Sports Podcast. Find us on whatsuppodcast.blogspot.com. Thank you so much for joining us. Hope you're doing well, and we will talk to you next time.